Again, a very good morning as well as a very warm welcome. Even though I am not a person in Bangalore, I have pleasure in inviting and welcoming you all for this important session, which is definitely an important session. This contains very long papers. 3 papers are there, and by stalwarts in PM&R, Dr. Suranjan Bhattacharji, Dr. Anand Pandian and Ajit Babu. So I think majority of the audience are in, so we will be starting the whole program in right earnest. I must also thank the organizers for giving me this introductory chairmanship, the first chairmanship for inaugurating this scientific events of our conference. I have pleasure in handing over the mic to my colleague, Dr. Joseph, to introduce.
Dear friends, our first speaker is Dr. Suranjan Bhattacharji. I think he is not well known to all of us. We did not introduce him because he already is well known among us. Anyway, he is presently the professor of PMR, Christian Medical College, Vellore, and he was the dean of the institution for director and dean of the institution till last September, I think. And he is a very good academician and a very good speaker. We have heard him many times in many conferences, and so fantastic a speaker he is. We will be very glad to have him with us for his presentation. Dr. Suranjan Bhattacharji, please.
Good morning. With the permission of the chair, I'd like to introduce the speaker for today's keynote address, sir. It's truly an honor to introduce Dr. Suranjan. Dr. Suranjan was born and raised in Eastern India and graduated from Loyola High School in Jamshedpur, Bihar. He was admitted to the Christian Medical College, Vellore, received his MBBS degree in 1975, and continued to study orthopedics in CMC and obtained his master's degree in orthopedics in 1982. He then went on to train at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in the UK and received his diploma in rehabilitation medicine from the Royal College of Physicians, London in 1984. He returned to CMC Vellore in 1986 as junior lecturer in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation and has served there since then for over 20 years as the head of the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Vellore. During this time, he has overseen a major expansion of the Rehabilitation Institute at Bagayam. He has been closely involved in the birth and early development of CMC's bioengineering department. He has been responsible for the setting up of a gate lab in the Rehab Institute and for expanding and modernizing the Artificial Limb Center there. Other projects close to his heart have been stem cell research and the electronic hand developed there. He has also, during this time, held additional responsibilities of Council Secretary at the Directorate, Additional Vice Principal, and Associate Director of the Christian Medical College at Vellore. Dr. Suranjan took over as Director of the Christian Medical College and Hospital, Vellore on September 23, 2007. During his 5-year tenure as Director, he carried forward the vision of the institution and its mandate of inclusive healthcare. His achievements, expanding the Chittoor and the Kagatti Pattarei campuses, he initiated NABH accreditation for the hospital, increasing the number of clinical specialities and seats, increasing housing facilities for the staffs, increasing the corpus funds available towards charity in healthcare and education are some of them. He remains emphatic that the increase in the number of patients must be matched by those qualities that healthcare now is in great need of, kindness, patience, compassion, and love. He has been quoted as saying, "We continue to strive to ensure that our growth in size and numbers is matched by a growth in the depth of our caring and commitment, in our effectiveness, our sensitivity, and our reaching out." During the testing times of CMC alumnus Dr. Vinayak Sen's imprisonment, Dr. Suranjan said, "Vinayak walked the talk. He is an inspiration for generations of doctors." He reminded us that it takes many things: access, freedom, food security, shelter, equity, and justice to make a healthy society. Dr. Suranjan retired as director on September 22nd, 2012. He brought to this august office his inspiring qualities of visionary leadership, integrity, and a deep commitment to the institution's heritage and values. Dr. Suranjan wears these qualities lightly. His simple demeanor hides an extremely well-read, articulate, philosophical, and erudite man. To work with him has been a blessing for me and for many of us here in the hall. He continues to touch the lives of all those he meets with light and grace. On behalf of the organizing committee IAPMR, may I please invite Dr. Suranjan to deliver his keynote address.
You can speak.
Can I please? No slides. Yeah. It's going to be a powerless, pointless presentation. My dear friends, it's good to be back home, and I want to wish each of you a lovely conference, a wonderful learning and sharing experience. As I was just explaining to the most respected chairpersons, that I flipped through many slides and then decided that I'd not use any, but I'd speak from my heart. So I want to start by first expressing my deepest gratitude. I followed Dr. Mary Verghese and Dr. Padankatti in CMC Vellore, and I think nothing of what we are today would have been possible without Dr. Mary Verghese's enormous contribution. And because she herself was wheelchair bound, her design and the qualities that she put into rehab have a quality that is very difficult for someone like me to even appreciate completely, leave alone copy. So if we appear to stand tall today, it's because we stand on the shoulders of giants. In addition to Dr. Mary Verghese, I also want to take this opportunity to thank a whole host of senior members of the IAPMR. I'm saying senior because they're senior to me. If I start from Trivandrum, Dr. Muridharan Menon, and of course Dr. Hariharan and Dr. K.K. Menon, Professor George Joseph, Dr. Ramarao, and Dr. Athani, and going up to Jaipur, Dr. Sethi, Dr. Kasriwal, to Delhi, Dr. Verma, Dr. Yadav, Upender, Lucknow, Dr. Agarwal, in Calcutta, Dr. Banerjee, and the entire team from there, coming down to Chennai, Dr. I.S. Shanmugam, Dr. Janardhanam, Dr. Ramar. The list is really long because I've been around for a long time and have got a huge number of friends in this gathering. So I want to take a few minutes to say how much we owe to this group of people who work so hard to get us where we are today. If it were not for their innovation, their hard work, their taking on the odds and battling with disability not only the physical kind, but the disability of people who don't understand and don't appreciate, we wouldn't be where we are. So my deepest gratitude and thanks to the entire group. I also now want to tell you a few stories. I know that conferences can sometimes get very heavy, and fortunately I have a pre-lunch session. The ones who have to speak after lunch, of course, have a much more difficult job. So I want to share with you a few stories which I hope will illustrate some things which I want to, some points which I would like to make. The first set of stories is about rehab in CMC. Although I've been there for 4 decades, I can assure you that rehab antedates me completely in CMC. CMC has been involved in rehab for nearly 70 years, formally, and informally, of course, for more than 100 years. The big 4 for rehab in CMC was leprosy, polio, and after Dr. Mary Verghese, paraplegia, and Dr. Jacob Abraham was a great researcher in stroke. So these were the 4 big problems that we encountered. Of these, leprosy was the one that had the biggest stigma. And you will be surprised to know that in some parts of the North Takot district, 1 in 10 people had leprosy. So it was common. It was not only stigmatizing, it was really, really common. And Vellore became well known for a hospital, as a hospital that would take care of such patients. And soon after independence, a young surgeon from England called Paul Brand came there. And of course, you know the history well. But I want to tell you 2 or 3 stories of how he made his discoveries. When he came to Vellore, he found that no one wanted to touch leprosy because everyone was afraid. It was thought of as the tail end of sexually transmitted diseases and punishment from God. Every possible ill that could happen to a person would all coalesce into one when you had leprosy. He had a mentor called Dr. Cochrane who worked in Chingalpet, which is a very well-known leprosy treatment center near Chennai. And when he saw the patients there and he saw their hands, he realized that he could do something. Initially, of course, he was very afraid. How does one deal with such severe deformities? What was thought at that time was that leprosy ate up all the fingers, destroyed the bone and the joints, and it was like yours, you know, it sort of just corroded through all the tissues. And it had a reputation that if you operated on leprosy patients, they would not heal. To try to understand this problem better, Dr. Paul Brand decided to start a rehabilitation center for leprosy patients in the campus. Now that was a very bold decision, and in Vellore, the people who were there had a very difficult time trying to get agreement about this, because the staff said it's okay for us to be exposed to this, but why should our children who are living in the campus be exposed to leprosy? But I'm happy to say that the staff of Vellore in the 1940s and 50s agreed to have this rehabilitation center there. And Dr. Brand didn't have a lot of equipment. He had a ruler. Okay? He had a 6-inch ruler. And with that, every day, he would measure the lengths of the fingers of the patients there. Because he was sure that there was something more to the resorption of patients' fingers than what was prevalent or understood. And one day, he found that an inch of someone's finger was missing. So he knew that no disease will take away an inch of a finger. So he said, a rat must have got it. He got the inmates to empty that whole hostel. And sure enough, near a little hole, there was an inch of this patient's finger. So just with a ruler, he completely demolished the then prevalent scientific notion that leprosy was a disease which could not be treated well. There was a problem with reconstruction, because here's a hand that is paralyzed. How do you take a hand that is paralyzed and make it stronger? Dr. Paul Brand in his writing again explains that one day he was trying to open the door to his office, which was adjacent to this rehab center. And the key would not turn, it was stuck. So one of the boys who was living there said, "Sir, I'll open for you." And he took it and he easily opened that lock. And when he handed the key to Dr. Paul Brand, when he took the key, he found that it was full of blood. And he then looked at this person's hand and he found that he had used so much force that actually the key had cut through the skin of his hand. So another revelation. Leprosy is a paralyzing condition, but the hand is not weak. The hand, in fact, is so strong that he was able to do something that Paul Brand himself couldn't do. I want to share these stories with you because quite often in the modern day world, we are anxious that if we don't have, DTI, MRI scans, or if we don't have the latest gadgets, we can't do research. But here was this wonderful human being who found things that transformed the care of patients with leprosy just by keeping his eyes and ears open and using the simple tools that all of us have. Okay? There are many other stories that I could tell you about how Dr. Paul Brand actually discovered this, the surgery that we all do nowadays to restore hands to full use. But I'll stop with these two. I want to tell you two other stories about Dr. Mary Verghese, and these are stories of her life. In 1954, while she was traveling in a bus, you know what happens when young people get together in a bus. Each one is showing off, sort of, and so one of her classmates decided to take the wheel so that he could demonstrate how well he could drive the bus. And sadly, the bus toppled. She became paraplegic. And everyone thought that this is the end of her life, because in 1954, not a lot of treatment was available for persons with spinal cord injury. Again, you know the story, how she was rehabilitated by Dr. Paul Brand, taught hand surgery, went to Perth in Australia to get some treatment for her spinal cord injury, then decided that she would start a similar service in this country, went to the Bellevue Clinic in New York, trained under Howard Rusk, and I think she and Dr. Muridhan Menon were contemporaries there. And she came back and started the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. Now, times were hard then. If we think that times are hard for us now, you can't imagine what it was like then. She had very little money, very little resources. She had to struggle for all kinds of facilities. But providentially, I think God was at work, and a donor gave her a large amount of money so she could build her rehab institute. She quickly recognized that she had to unlearn the principles that she had learned in New York and decide to treat patients with spinal cord injuries differently in South India. Again, providentially, the ICMR and the Department of Science and Technology gave her research grants because she explained to them that at that time all of rehab was designed around the chair or around the bed in a Western country. Completely understandable, because it's cold there and you don't want to be on the floor. But in a hot country like India, we want to be on the floor because it's cool. The colder air is lower down. So trying to rehabilitate people and put them onto chairs and beds, which was, would not only separate the patient from his family, but actually was not scientific. So she struggled with a group of engineers and developed mobility aids, which were completely in keeping with the scientific principles that she had learned and appropriate for the population and the people that she was trying to help. So she developed the low-level trolley. Of course, the low-level trolley fell into disrepute because soon it began to be used by lots of other people to beg, and we don't use it anymore. But I still remember with great respect the principles that Dr. Mary taught us, that you don't have to have a lot of resources as long as you have your brain and as long as you bring into play the enormous resource that the patient and their relatives have and are. So she taught me that if I can find ways in which we can unlock the resources that every patient comes with and their relatives, then we can do much, much more than if we ignore their expertise and just pretend or believe that we have all the answers and our patients don't. So making sure that the care was appropriate and relevant and empowering people were the two big principles that I learned from Dr. Mary. She herself had been empowered as a woman, as a disabled person, as a person in a developing country. There were so many things that were stacked against her. But in 1963, she published in the Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, she presented a paper on phase conversion of the tibialis posterior tendon muscle in patients with leprosy who have this tibialis posterior transfer in the International Congress in Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in Madrid. So she was way ahead of her times and yet completely clued in about what needed to be done for her people. These are just some examples that I want to share with you of how we too today can harness the resources that we have, bring them into play intelligently. Remember that working for people involves working with people, and remembering that together we are so much more powerful and so much more effective when we are united and work together than if we work separately. I entitled this story Surprised by Joy because when I was the age of some of the younger members here, I wasn't sure quite what to do with myself. I was very keen to be a doctor. And of course, you can't study in CMC without encountering rehab. But there was no training program in rehab, and although we used to go to the rehab institute every week, I disappeared to work with the Missionaries of Charity in Calcutta and in Bihar for 18 months. CMC asked if I would work in rehab, and I, being the ignorant person I was then, said, look, I don't know what it is, so please will you forgive me if I say no, can I hope you'll find somebody else. They didn't find somebody else. They came and asked me again when I'd finished my 2 years working in Bihar and in Calcutta. And I agreed to do orthopedics because I said, if I do orthopedics, I can go into rehab, or I can go into orthopedics, or I can go back to the mission hospital. I don't want to. I was completely uncertain and very afraid. And so I chose to do something that would not box me in. I did orthopedics, and the then leaders in CMC didn't let me forget that I had made an informal promise. So I then worked for 2 years in plastic surgery because I was terrified of working in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation with nobody else to guide me. Dr. Mary had retired in '76, the year I was an intern, and I was very keen that I work with someone to learn from them. So I worked for 2 years in plastic surgery and then went to Stoke and learned some urology. And when I came back in 1986, I still hoped that CMC would have found someone else to do rehab, but nobody else was found, and so Suranjan was it, and I joined the department. Now when I look back, I can join the dots, but at that point I didn't know. And I know that it's the same for many of you. You have spent many years training, and you sometimes wonder, when am I going to get to do what I really want to do? But I can assure you that now that I join all the dots, I realize that all that I had done until then was actually preparing me for this job in physical medicine and rehabilitation, and I have enjoyed every day of my time in the department. My reluctance was my ignorance, and it has been completely proven to be untrue. What did I really enjoy? When I joined the department, we had lots of patients because Dr. Mary Varghese and Dr. Bhattacharji had worked very hard. There was lots of things going on. And we began to take care of their pressure sores and their incontinence. When we spoke to the patients, often they told us, these are the things that we are really worried about, please will you help us with this? And fortunately my training had enabled me to do this. But to my utter horror, when we began to follow up the patients in the community, we found that 75% of them were dead within 2 years. So we went back and thought and worried and discussed things among ourselves with all the other people in CMC. Just about that time we began to discover that actually in North Arcot district, the commonest cause of death is suicide or homicide. By far the commonest cause of death. Something like 70% of deaths in adults is actually suicides or homicides. This was astounding for us. This was not, we were not Scandinavia, we were India. And we were used to hearing the people die of cholera and typhoid and TB. But when we were surprised by this data, we went back to our health workers and said, please, verify this. Tell us, is this really happening? So then they began to come back and tell us, yes, it is happening. Because suicide is a crime, and I know that I'm saying this in a man's world which has struggled so hard against this problem of suicides. The village leader somebody will commit suicide, the village headman will say, cut her down and put down a snake bite, they can't take the snake to the court. And so suicides or homicides were underreported. But when we began to look at the data, huge numbers of people were committing suicide. Well, I breathed a sigh of relief, not because suicide is a good way to die, but at least it wasn't just our patients who were committing suicide, but all people were committing suicide, and it was the commonest cause of death. So we then asked ourselves, what's the use of all this effort in trying to help people to be restored to a life if they're going to die? We went across the road and talked to our friends from the psychiatry department, and Dr. Jacob Jordan and Dr. K.S. Jacob and a whole group of people, Pratap Tarian. They worked with us, and we designed interventions to ensure that our patients' psyche was strengthened. They were not mentally ill, but the tremendous difficulties that they had to live with, they could not cope with when they went back. And so group therapy, individual therapy, and the use of a few drugs helped us to address this problem. When we began to visit them again, we found that just visiting them, helping their psyche wasn't enough, because they had to earn money. So we then improved our vocational rehabilitation program, trying to desperately understand what the community needs, match that with the person's capacity and our own capacity to teach a new vocation. And of these three, I can assure you the weakest link was us. So we spent many hours and days and months struggling with trying to understand in our communities with limited resources, with limited vocational options, how could we get people to not only just survive, but become leaders in their community. And with the help of our social workers, Guru in Ilango, we began to do this. But we found that a patient got admitted, and then when we followed them up, they survived for about 5-7 years, and then they began to die. So we realized that we still hadn't addressed the problem completely. We decided that the patients needed a transfusion of enthusiasm, of love, of strength. And so we designed this thing which we call the Rehab Mela, for lack of a more imaginative name, I suppose. And once a year, about 150 to 200 of our patients come back, and we just have fun. We continue to have trouble with money, like everyone in our country. So we put up a little thatch, have beds with sand on the ground so that patients don't get sores, and we have sports, we check them out, we repair their calipers, and the wonderful thing is that this has worked. Now we find that if we can be in touch with our patients and that we can work together, they do survive. We have people now surviving for 20, 30 years. We recognized though that all the patients couldn't come to us, so we began to have mini sort of melas or fairs in different parts of our district. So we recognized that just scientific input, although it could be of high quality, psychological input was not enough, that we needed to involve the entire society in this effort. As a result of this, now many of our patients have begun to fill the gaps that still exist between what we are and what we would be. One of our patients, who was a graduate from the Indian Institute of Management of this city, was injured when he was a student. They had a party and he fell from a building and got injured. And he has now, 25 years later, really become successful and has come back as a volunteer. He does what I call the Mary Varghese thing. Because he's in a chair, he's encouraging patients, working with them. He's got his friends together. They have found resources that bridge the gap between what resources the person has and what we need to buy medicines or to buy a wheelchair or to modify the person's house or to learn a new vocation. And I'm really happy to say that this partnership has now come full circle. And we are back with a good realization that if we work together, we are not sure who is the patient and who is the physician, that each of us is actually treating the other, and together we can overcome disability, disease and poverty. Now, what about the future? I have only 6 minutes left. The future, my friends, is glorious. I've met many of you, although I've been away on a sabbatical for 5 years. Having come back, I'm happy to say that the science of physical medicine and rehabilitation is growing rapidly. There is great realization among many people in society about the importance, and I think that the future is going to be much better than the past has been for India, for the people with disabilities, and for the professionals who help them. I have no doubt about that. But I feel that we need to gear up to meet an emerging challenge that is going to be even bigger than the challenge that Suranjan faced when he was your age. What is this challenge, you may ask me? You tell me that polio is now controlled. Polio is, has been eradicated in our country. We've not had any polio for 2 years. So of the big four, one has disappeared. There's a lot of debate going on about vaccine-induced polio, and I won't go into that because that's another lecture. But Dr. Jacob John and his colleagues in CMC have been warning us for a long time that we need to watch out for the vaccine-induced polio, and we need to move from OPV to IPV. But whatever it is, I'm really happy that children are not threatened by polio in our country. Leprosy is no longer a big problem, but it's still a problem. In fact, WHO and some of the other organizations now agree that they were too quick to dismantle the infrastructure that had been so painstakingly put up for helping persons with leprosy. That the plans and the expectations that leprosy would be eradicated were belied, mostly because we still don't know how leprosy is transmitted. Have we ever eradicated a disease when we did not know how it was transmitted? We think it's transmitted through the nose, through a primary complex in the nose that is similar to the primary complex in the lung, in TB, but we are still not sure. So polio and leprosy are less of a problem, but still big problems in our country. My friends, we are increasing by 30 million people a year. In 10 years' time, when many of you will still be in practice, we'll have 300 million more people in our country. That's the population of Europe or the population of North America. If we have a gap between supply and demand of professionals today, can you imagine how big that gap is going to be in 10 years' time? So we need to get our act together and work really hard to address the challenges that are going to be facing us. I'm completely confident that the science will grow, but it's going to need concerted efforts from each one of you to ensure that we are applying the best science to every rehab problem. We may have cured many of the infectious diseases, but diabetes and obesity are huge. And what really is the most scientifically proven effective way of treating them? Exercise. What's the most effective way of treating heart disease?